I still remember the moment I found out. It's burned into my brain, the cold shock that hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd always thought my wife, Lisa, was the strongest person I knew. She'd been my rock through everything, the one who could make me laugh even in the worst times. So when I saw what I saw that night, everything I believed in collapsed. It all started a few weeks ago. Lisa had been acting different, more distant. She'd cancel plans, dodge my questions, and when I pressed her, she'd brush me off with a weak smile and some excuse about work stress or feeling tired. I told myself I was imagining things. Couples fight, right? Maybe I was just paranoid. But I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling, like a small voice whispering that I was blind to what was really happening. Then, the week of my dad's funeral came. That was supposed to be a time for mourning, for family coming together. Instead, it turned into something else entirely. I remember sitting in the church pew, my hands clenched into fists, trying to focus on the prayers, but my mind kept wandering. I kept glancing at Lisa, who was sitting beside me, holding my hand a little too tightly. She was crying, and I was grateful for her support. But something about her eyes didn't sit right. The same night, I stayed up late, as I often did after long days. I wanted to talk to her, ask her what was going on, just a simple, honest conversation. Instead, I found her phone on the coffee table, unlocked. My heart hammered so loudly I thought everyone in the house could hear it. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but my curiosity got the better of me. I peeked. That's when I saw it, text messages, flurries of them. Flirty, suggestive, intimate between her and Dan, my best friend. I froze, my stomach twisting painfully. I read the words the way they talked about meeting up, laughing about how crazy it was that they'd been hiding this so long. My chest grew tight, and I felt a rage bubbling up hot, uncontrollable. I remember clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I'd never felt this kind of fury before. How could she do this? Right under my nose, during the hardest week of my life, she was sneaking around with my best friend. My mind raced, and I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to see them for myself, confront this mess head on. That's when I decided to follow her. The next day, I watched her leave the house in her usual hurried way, clutching her purse. I followed at a safe distance, trying to keep calm while my blood boiled. She went to a small, tucked-away cafe downtown. When I got there, I parked across the street, hidden behind a row of parked cars, and watched her go inside. Minutes later, Dan arrived. They sat in a corner booth, leaning toward each other, whispering. I could see their faces, flushed and eager. My palms felt slick with sweat. I wanted to storm in and tear them apart. But I knew I had to be patient, strategic. If I acted impulsively, I'd lose everything. Instead, I took photos, clear, undeniable proof, then slipped away before they saw me. The whole day felt surreal. I kept replaying everything in my head, and the worst part was the silence in my chest. I didn't cry, didn't yell. I just felt hollow, like someone had knocked the wind out of me. I kept asking myself, how long has this been going on? How deep does it run? And most of all, how could she lie to me about being pregnant? I know people say love blinds you. I thought I knew Lisa. I thought I knew her better than anyone. Turns out I was wrong. The woman I married, the woman I trusted with everything, had been betraying me during my father's funeral of all times. I wanted to scream, but instead I sat there, cold and numb. I had all the evidence I needed now, but I didn't know what to do with it. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept turning over every detail, every word I'd seen. I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest, but underneath it all, a dark resolve was forming. She'd lied, she'd cheated, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I just had to figure out the right way to make her pay. That's when I started planning. Do you want me to continue? The more I thought about it, the clearer my plan became. I didn't want just another fight, another crying match or screaming match that would leave us both drained and broken. I wanted real revenge, something that would hit her where it hurts, something that would make her regret ever crossing that line. I knew I couldn't do it impulsively. I had to be patient, precise, and cold. First, I started gathering every bit of evidence I could. The photos from the cafe, the texts I'd seen, even some of her social media activity. I wanted to make sure if I ever confronted her, I had everything laid out, proof she couldn't deny, proof she couldn't spin into some misunderstanding. I also made a mental note of her daily routine, her habits, her patterns. The more I knew, the easier it was to plan my move. But I didn't just want to catch her off guard. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I wanted her to understand that I knew everything, that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. That's when I decided to turn the tables. I knew she'd expect tears or pleas or maybe even denial. But I was going to do something different. I was going to make her see that her actions had consequences, not just for me, but for her too. I called up a private investigator, just enough to get some more dirt, some background on her new friendship with Dan. I needed to know if there was more to it, if it was just a fling or something deeper. In the meantime, I set my plan into motion. One evening, I waited until she was out at her book club, which she'd mentioned a few times. I went through her phone once more just to confirm the latest messages and see if she'd slipped up again. I wanted to be sure I had an airtight case. Sure enough, there was more. Even more flirtatious messages and some revealing photos she'd sent Dan. It was disgusting, really. Seeing her so carefree, so blatantly unfaithful, it made my stomach turn. Then came the next step. I bought a small, unassuming box. Inside, I put the latest evidence, screenshots, her texts, even some of the pictures I'd taken myself. I wrapped it carefully, knowing I'd use it as part of my final confrontation. I also drafted a letter, simple, direct. No accusations, just a statement of facts. I wanted her to see everything, laid out plainly. No room for denial. The night I planned to confront her, I felt my palms sweat and my heart pounding in my chest. I was nervous, more than nervous, honestly. I was terrified of what might happen afterward. But that fear was eclipsed by the anger that coursed through me. I had to do this. I had to make her understand what she'd lost. When she finally came home, I was waiting in the dining room, the evidence box on the table, the letter in my hand. She looked surprised, maybe even nervous, when she saw me sitting there. Her smile was forced, and I could see the flicker of guilt behind her eyes. "Lisa," I started, my voice steady but cold. "I found out everything about you and Dan, about the lies, the cheating during my father's funeral. I have all the proof right here." I pushed the box toward her. "You can deny it, but it's all there." She froze, her face draining of color. "You're lying." "You're mistaken," she said weakly, but her trembling hands betrayed her. "I don't lie," I said sharply. "Look at this." I held up the letter I'd written, and her eyes flicked over the words. Her shoulders sagged, and I saw her realize the game was up. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You've betrayed me, Lisa. You've betrayed everything we built, and I'm not the kind of man who lets that slide without consequences." My voice was firm now, full of venom I couldn't suppress. "You're going to leave today, and don't bother trying to spin this. I've got everything I need." Her face twisted into a mix of shame and defiance. "You're overreacting, I swear. It's not what you think. We were just—" "No," I interrupted. "You're not going to lie your way out of this one. I want my keys. Pack your stuff and get out." I stood up, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with rage. She looked like she wanted to argue, to beg, but she knew she'd been caught. She hesitated, then slowly moved toward the door, her hands trembling. I didn't say another word. I just watched her leave, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Finally, the truth was out. I stayed there in the empty room, staring at the evidence. It was done. The damage was done. I knew I'd have to face the fallout, but at least I'd taken back some control. The next step was clearing out her things, handing over the keys, and closing that chapter for good. I thought about how I was going to move forward. I'd lost a wife I loved, yes, but I'd gained clarity. Maybe someday I'd find someone who'd actually deserve my trust. But for now, I had to clean up the mess and rebuild. I knew one thing: she wouldn't be coming back, and I was finally free to start over. Want me to keep going? The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That strange, heavy cloud over my head had finally lifted. But I knew the true work was just beginning. I had to do the hard part now, cutting ties, moving on, and making sure she couldn't come back. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way back into my life, not after everything she'd done. First thing I did was pack her things. I didn't want her to get comfortable, to think she still had a foothold. Here, I grabbed a box from the closet and started slowly, methodically, gathering her clothes, her jewelry, her personal stuff. I didn't want her to see me angry, at least not yet. I just focused on the task, feeling the weight of each item I folded and placed inside. It was like packing away pieces of the life I thought we shared. While I was at it, I went through her phone again, this time more thoroughly. I wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything. Her texts, her photos, even her social media messages. I knew I was obsessing, but I needed to be sure. I found more evidence of her betrayal, more flirtatious comments, secret emojis, even some of the locations she'd visited with Dan. All of it just confirmed I'd done the right thing. Her departure was quick. She showed up at the door, eyes red and swollen, face pale. She looked like she'd been crying, but I didn't want her to see anything other than cold resolve. I handed her a small envelope. "Here, your stuff, keys, everything. Leave it at the front door, don't come back." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk, just for a minute?" "No," I said, voice sharp. "There's nothing to talk about. You lied, you cheated. You betrayed me during my father's funeral. I don't want to hear your excuses, just go." She looked like she was about to protest, but then she saw the look in my eyes, the anger I couldn't hide. She nodded silently, clutching her purse, and finally turned away. I watched her walk down the driveway, her figure shrinking in the distance. The moment she drove off, I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. I'd finally closed the chapter, but the ache in my chest was real. Still, I reminded myself I'd done the right thing. I'd taken control. I'd stood up for myself. Over the next few days, I started to piece my life back together. I cleaned out her side of the closet, boxed up her stuff, and handed over her keys to the landlord. The house felt emptier without her, quieter, but also somehow freer. I could breathe again. I even went out for a walk, feeling the cool air on my face, trying to focus on the present instead of dwelling on the betrayal. Of course, I couldn't keep it all bottled up. I needed to talk to someone who'd understand what I was going through. I reached out to a few friends, told them what had happened. They were sympathetic, but I could tell they didn't fully grasp the depth of my pain. Still, just saying it out loud helped. It made me realize I wasn't alone. The worst part was the aftermath, the questions that kept gnawing at me. Would she try to contact me? Would Dan try to reach out? I knew I had to stay strong and resist any temptation to retaliate in kind. Revenge was done, but the aftermath was just beginning. I'd planted the seed, and now I had to watch it grow into something better. Looking back, I realized I was blind for a long time. I ignored the red flags, convinced myself she was just stressed or busy. But those little things, her secrecy, her flirtations, the lies, those were all signs I missed. If I'd paid closer attention, maybe I could have avoided all of this. But I guess sometimes you need to fall hard to see what's really there. I learned a lot from this. Trust isn't something you give blindly, it's something you earn and protect. When that trust is broken, the damage runs deep. But I also learned that taking control, even in the worst moments, is the only way to reclaim your life. No matter how much it hurts, you have to face the truth, confront it head-on, and then walk away with your dignity intact. Next step, I plan to focus on myself now. No more looking back. I've got some legal steps to consider, but for today I'm just trying to breathe, to remind myself that I'm better off without the lies. It's time to rebuild one piece at a time. Want me to continue? After I finished clearing out her stuff and handing over the keys, I felt a strange calm settle over me, like I'd finally taken back control of my life. But I knew I couldn't just pretend it was over. The fallout was just beginning, and I had to prepare myself for what was coming next. That's when I started thinking about the long-term damage, the emotional scars, and what I needed to do to truly move on. First, I decided to confront the reality that I'd been blind for so long. I replayed all the little signs I ignored, her distracted look when I caught her texting, the way she dodged my questions, her sudden disappearances. I'd always been trusting, maybe too trusting, but that trust was shattered now. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but realizing I overlooked all the warning signs. I reminded myself of one thing: I'd been naive. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt for too long, even when I felt that gut instinct telling me something was wrong. My eyes had been wide open now, and I couldn't pretend I didn't see the truth. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that the pain was part of the process. It was necessary to feel it, to let it burn through me, so I'd never forget what I'd lost or why I'd chosen to walk away. Still, I knew I had to be careful. I didn't want her to manipulate me again, even indirectly. I started setting some boundaries, limiting my contact, blocking her from my social media, and avoiding any unnecessary interactions. I also reached out to a lawyer about the legal steps I could take, not to punish her in some petty way, but because I needed to protect myself financially and emotionally. I wanted to make sure I had everything documented in case she tried to come back or cause trouble. One thing that kept bothering me was the thought of Dan, my best friend. I'd trusted him, and he'd betrayed me just as much as Lisa. I didn't plan on just letting that slide. I wanted to know what he thought about all this, if he felt any remorse. But I also knew I couldn't confront him yet, not until I was in a better place, emotionally and mentally. Still, I made a mental note to handle that later. In the meantime, I started focusing on myself. I went back to the gym, trying to get some physical activity to shake off the emotional mess. The feeling of sweat and exertion helped clear my mind. I even signed up for a course to pick up a new hobby, something to fill the empty hours. It was tough at first. Every little thing reminded me of her, of what we'd lost. But gradually I began feeling stronger, more in control. At work I was more focused. I kept my head down, avoided gossip, and tried to put all my energy into my projects. Some colleagues noticed I seemed different, more serious, less engaged, but I didn't care. I was just trying to survive each day without breaking apart. I knew I'd have days where the pain came back, where the anger resurfaced, but I also knew I had to keep moving forward. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie in bed and replay everything: the lies, the betrayal, the nights she spent with Dan. My stomach would tighten and I'd feel that familiar rage bubbling up, but I'd remind myself, revenge isn't about revenge anymore. It's about reclaiming my life, and I was determined not to let her win this round. I also started talking to a therapist, not because I thought I was crazy, but because I knew I needed someone objective to help me process what had happened. It was strange at first, sitting there, spilling out all my feelings, but it helped. I realized I'd been holding in so much anger, so much disappointment, and I needed a safe space to unload it. The therapist told me I was healing, even if it didn't feel that way yet. One thing I learned from all this is that betrayal wounds cut deep, but they also force you to grow. I'd always thought I was pretty resilient, but this tested me in ways I never expected. Still, I came out of it with a sharper sense of who I was and what I deserved. Trust isn't something you give blindly, it's something that's earned every day. I know I'll get through this step by step. I don't have it all figured out yet, but I have clarity now about what I want, what I won't tolerate, and where I'm headed. I've lost her, yes, but I've gained something far more valuable: a new sense of strength and a commitment to never let someone take away my peace again. Next, I plan to take legal action, file for divorce, protect my rights, and make sure she can't cause me any more trouble. But for today, I'm just going to sit with what I've built: a clean slate and a future that's finally mine to shape. Want me to keep going? The legal steps I took felt like finally sealing the wound. I met with a lawyer, went through the paperwork, and filed for divorce. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting myself and ensuring she couldn't manipulate me or drag things out. I needed to close this chapter once and for all, and I wasn't going to let her worm her way back in, no matter how much she might try. The process was surprisingly straightforward, but it still made everything real. Sitting across from the lawyer, signing papers that formally ended what I thought was eternal, that's when it hit me how much I'd been through. All the lies, the betrayal, the pain, but also the relief that I was finally taking control. I remember telling the lawyer, I want to make sure she can't come back and cause trouble. I don't want her to get a dime or a second chance at messing with me. He nodded, and we discussed the terms. I made sure the divorce decree clearly stated my rights: no alimony, no joint assets, nothing that could give her leverage. I wanted her to understand that she'd burned her bridges. The papers were filed, and I felt a strange sense of closure, like I'd finally put a big, heavy box of heartbreak behind me. In the days that followed, I focused on clearing out the last remnants of her presence. I handed over the house keys, packed away the last of her things, and cleaned up the entire space. Every corner I scrubbed, I felt like I was washing away the dirt of deception. My apartment was empty now, but it was mine again, purely my space. That felt good. I also started working on rebuilding my social life. I reconnected with some friends I'd neglected during the chaos, and I went out more. I even made a few new acquaintances, people who didn't know my story, who just saw me as someone trying to start fresh. I wanted normalcy, even if it meant pushing through some awkward moments. The truth was, I needed to remind myself I was still a person, still capable of happiness. But the thing that surprised me the most was how many people came out of the woodwork with their own stories. Once I shared what I'd been through, I realized I wasn't alone. Everyone has their own betrayal tale, their own heartbreak. Hearing those stories made me feel less isolated, more grounded. It's amazing how pain, once shared, can turn into a kind of strength. Still, I couldn't just forget about Dan. That betrayal cut deep, and I knew I had to address it, at least to myself. I didn't want to be consumed by hatred, but I needed to acknowledge that the man I'd trusted most in the world had stabbed me in the back. I kept thinking about the times we'd spent together, how I'd defended him, how he'd been like a brother. Now, I saw him as someone I'd have to confront, maybe not right away, but someday. Mostly, I just want to focus on healing. I've realized that forgiveness isn't about excusing what they did, it's about freeing myself from their hold. I decided I wouldn't waste any more energy on anger that only hurt me. Instead, I'd put that energy into building a new life, one based on honesty, respect, and boundaries. The final piece of my plan: I'm gradually letting go of the past. Every day, I remind myself I'm better off without her. Without the lies, the betrayal, the false hopes. I'm learning to trust again, but smarter this time. I'm not rushing into anything, and I'm not letting anyone take advantage of my kindness. Today, I finally handed over the last of her belongings, her last piece of my life. With a small, heavy sigh, I left her keys at the front desk of the apartment building, knowing I'd never have to see her face again. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling a strange sense of peace, like I'd finally closed the door on that chapter. What I learned is that sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to see your own strength. I don't regret what happened because it taught me to be more aware, more cautious, and more respectful of myself. I won't forget what I went through, but I refuse to be defined by it. I will rebuild and I will be better. Want me to continue? Standing outside that apartment building, watching her move out for the last time, I felt an odd mixture of emptiness and relief. The air was cool against my face, and I could hear the distant sounds of traffic, the world moving on without me. I took a deep breath, trying to anchor myself in this moment of finality. It was over, done with the lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak. I'd handed over the keys, closed the door, and now I was finally free to breathe. That moment marked the end of a long, painful chapter, but it also felt like the beginning of something new. I knew I wouldn't forget what happened, but I also knew I'd moved past the point of being a victim. I'd faced my worst fears, looked betrayal square in the face, and come out stronger. Now it was about rebuilding, more cautious, more aware, and with a sharper sense of my own worth. I took one last look at the empty apartment door, then turned and walked away. The sun was shining, and for the first time in a long time I felt hope flickering inside me. Not because everything was perfect, far from it, but because I finally understood that I had the power to choose my future. I wasn't defined by her lies or her betrayal. I was in control now. The first thing I did was block her from all my social media and change my phone number. No more contact, no more questions, no more pain. I didn't want the past lingering around, tempting me to look back or second-guess my decision. I had to let go. Completely. That meant cutting off the ties that kept me anchored in that chapter of my life. Next, I went out to celebrate. Nothing crazy, just a simple dinner by myself, a good meal, and some music I actually liked. I sat there, feeling the warmth of the food, the hum of conversation around me, and finally that little flicker of peace I'd been craving. I let myself feel it, the relief of being done, the pride of standing my ground and the hope of finally moving forward. Over the following weeks, I kept focusing on myself. I went back to therapy, worked out regularly, and picked up old hobbies I'd put aside. I even started dating again cautiously, slowly dipping my toes into the water. Nothing serious right away, I wasn't rushing. I just needed to remind myself that I was still capable of love, of trust, that I was still worth caring for. I also made a point to reflect on what I'd learned. Trust is precious, and it's something you earn, not just give away. Betrayal hurts, but it teaches you resilience. It forces you to look inward and realize your own strength. And most importantly, I learned that revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about reclaiming your peace and dignity. That's what I wanted, and that's what I got. Looking back, I see how naive I was to think love meant never doubting. Now I know that being cautious doesn't mean not trusting. It means trusting wisely. It's about setting boundaries, recognizing red flags, and listening to that quiet voice inside you. I realize I should have seen the warning signs sooner, but even if I hadn't, I'm grateful for the clarity I gained from this nightmare. So, here's what I want to say to anyone reading this who's going through something similar. Don't be afraid to face the truth. Don't pretend everything's fine when it's not. You deserve honesty, respect, and loyalty, values that can't be bought or faked. If someone betrays you, it hurts, but it also offers a chance to grow stronger. Trust yourself, make your boundaries clear, and don't look back. The final step for me was simple. I went to the courthouse, handed over the signed divorce papers, and watched as they processed everything. That day, I left with a sense of closure I'd been craving for so long. I felt my shoulders loosen, my heart lighter. The chapter was officially closed, and I could finally move on. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized I wasn't just walking away from a betrayal. I was walking toward a new version of myself. Someone who had been broken but was now rebuilding, stronger and wiser. I don't regret what happened. It shaped me. It taught me what I deserve and what I won't accept again. And so, I step forward into this new chapter, not with bitterness but with clarity. I know there will be more challenges ahead, more lessons to learn, but I also know I won't let anyone diminish me again. The scars remain, but they no longer control me. I am my own person, and I am finally free. The worst has passed and the best is yet to come.